My name is Brian LaRue, and I'm the guitarist, singer, and main songwriter in the power pop garage rock band Safe Houses, and our HQ is in Brooklyn, New York. What's your background? So the four of us are from all over the place: California, Northern Virginia, upstate New York by way of Texas, and personally, I grew up in Connecticut in one of those factory towns that used to be a factory town until the factories moved away. After high school, I landed in New Haven, Connecticut, lived there, played in bands for a while, then moved to Brooklyn and became involved in the DIY music culture here. And that DIY culture and ethos is central to how Safe Houses has developed as a band over the years. That's the community that has really sustained us. My background in music is that my mom played a few musical instruments. There was always music on the radio or stereo. My parents didn't push me toward doing music, but they made it clear that it was there for me if I wanted it. My mom gave me piano lessons briefly, and then in fourth grade, I joined the school band as a trumpet player and did that all the way up to college. I started my first band, a punk band, when I was 14, and eventually I started writing slightly more involved songs and recording them by myself on a cassette 4-track. To my mind, there's a through line from those solo 4-track recordings to Safe Houses as the band is today. It's the same body of work that just keeps expanding. How does this impact how you see the world and create music? My experiences in school band growing up, your concert band and jazz bands and brass quintets and all that, I believe really informed what I hear in my head when I'm writing a song. I learned how to pick apart the individual notes of chords and hear the interplay of different sections of the ensemble. And through that experience, I was able to start playing guitar and copying my favorite songs without taking lessons. It also started me thinking about how to arrange a full rock band so that there is nuance and melody and counterpoint. One aspect of my upbringing that impacted me and informed the sort of songs I wanted to write is that my childhood and adolescence were very solitary. And what I remember of that period is being lonely a lot of the time. So in writing a song, I often try to access that emotional space to try to connect with people who might feel similarly. Because you can appreciate pop music when things are going well in your life, but when you're not doing that great is where you need pop music. Also, in any place I've lived, the effects of wealth disparity are pretty in your face. I think the theme of being skint while in close contact with people who are the opposite has always been present in the songs that I write. I like to say that all my songs are about either loneliness or bad day jobs, and that's not 100% accurate, but so what? Who are your biggest influences? My earliest major influence was just oldies radio in general, which when I was growing up still meant mostly 60s, early 70s pop and rock and roll. So you get those great Brill building songwriting teams, girl group stuff, British Invasion, of course, Motown, where I'm still picking up little lessons from like Smokey Robinson and Holland Dozier Holland. When I started figuring out how to write songs, I was heavily influenced by the Smiths and Elvis Costello, and I think I took away some elements from them that are still baked into my approach. The Kinks are a really big deal for me, the Zombies, Big Star, Buzzcocks, X, Richard Hell, The Fall, even though Safe Houses music doesn't sound like theirs at all. I mean, being influenced isn't just about aping melodies. Hold on, brief sip of tea over here. Okay. What are you focusing on right now? Right now, we are focused on releasing a backlog of music we've already recorded and on rehearsing and stage testing new songs for an album we're aiming to record later this year. We've just gone through a rather unusual process that started in 2022 when we received a very legitimate cease and desist letter from a law firm representing a guy who held a registered trademark on our band's previous name. We had been called Shelter Dogs, but somebody else had trademarked that name a long time ago and finally decided he was not willing to share it. So first, while we were trying to negotiate with their lawyers, we couldn't put out new music because if it turned out we had to change our name, that would sink all of our promotional efforts. And then when it became certain that they weren't going to budge, we couldn't put out new music until all of the streaming audio platforms updated the text, images, and metadata to reflect the name Safe Houses. If those two bands were in any way tangled up digitally as a result of automation on the platform's part, that could actually create a legal issue. Now, that whole process, because we needed to be very clear about it, wrapped up in January. So now we can release new music. We have a digital single. We're calling it a digital double A-side, even though that's technically impossible in digital. 2 songs, Someday Is Starting Now and I Don't Feel Like Dancing, coming out May 9th. And at the same time, we're releasing a music video for Someday Is Starting Now. Next after that, we'll sort out details around releasing an EP that we've had in the can since before the cease and desist. I had initially intended our next record after that to also be an EP, but because we had this delay, I ended up writing a full album's worth of songs instead. So when we go back into the studio, ideally in the fall, we're going to be recording a whole album. What is the biggest challenge of being a musician? The biggest challenge of being a musician is actually... let me again. The biggest challenge of being a musician is actually a dual challenge, right? There's the practical financial side, and then there's the more ephemeral intellectual side. On the practical side, there's just the reality that because the cost of living, particularly housing, is so high, you have to work a full-time job or more than one part-timer. So what that means is there's a strong chance that the hours when you're at your most focused and you're most creatively fertile are hours when you're at work. And unless you have an And unless you have inherited wealth, this is a dynamic you're stuck in. So there's a challenge to find those optimal creative hours and to create and uphold a schedule accordingly, to put the time on your calendar and just not touch it, even if things get really busy. Of course, doing all that can still be exhausting, and you have to keep yourself from falling into fatalism. And that relates back to the intellectual side, really, because that side is the challenge of keeping your music fresh, finding new things to say, taking in new ideas, uncovering new angles. Stasis is easy. Continued growth requires effort and initiative and intention. Another sip of tea over here. Okay. What advice would you give to your younger self? I would advise my younger self that if you want something, no one is going to just give it... Let me try again. I would advise my younger self that if you want something, no one is going to just give you permission to do it. And whatever it is, you probably don't need permission anyway. Be fearless about finding your way around the gatekeepers, even if it looks like it's not the most direct path. Okay. Have you tried any unconventional mediums or techniques? This band takes a pretty direct approach for the most part. We don't need to experiment or even discuss very much in the practice space. Everyone brings something to the table up front that fits properly, and then we just work on making it fit even better. Within this band, I overwrite a lot, and I've found out that in itself is not common. Like, sometimes I'll write 5 verses for a 3-verse song and just pick the best 3. Sometimes I'll need to rewrite the verse entirely a couple times, like lyrics and music, until I feel like I've nailed it. Bridges too. I might come up with 3 different chord progressions for a bridge. I prefer to try multiple variations instead of taking one idea and trying to make it perfect. How do you prepare to make a track / record in studio and then transfer that to a live performance? Safe Houses is a live band first. That is our primary function, and the gig is the first exposure almost all of our listeners are going to have with our music. So the melodies have to be strong and bold, because you can't expect the audience in a small crowd to be able to make out your lyrics. When I write a song, I'll make a demo on my laptop that's vocal, guitar, bass, drum machine, maybe a keyboard melody or a vocal harmony if that seems like a core part of the song to me. Everyone gives it a listen and develops their parts on their own, Then, when we're in the practice space, we make sure all the instruments cut through distinctly, the melodies and counter melodies are allowed to shine. Our mentality is that the audience doesn't come out to experience the breadth of your artistic vision, right? The audience comes out because they've had a long week and they want to blow off steam, and the band's responsibility is to create an environment for that. In the studio, you want to retain that same drive and clarity you get at the gig, but you want to give the listener something they don't get from the live show. We like to create a good headphone experience. I'll take what I play live and split it into distinct rhythm and lead guitar tracks, and we do vocal stacking, bigger vocal harmonies than we normally do live. I like to imagine someone listening to the recordings at home late at night. What can enhance that experience? What's the best reaction someone has had to your music? To my mind, the best reaction anyone's had to our music is, I don't know what you're doing musically or what you call it, but I love it. Like some variation of that. Now, in my perspective, we're not doing anything particularly weird or left field. And we have people come up to us all the time who get it immediately, and they'll start rattling off band names. Hey, I'm hearing some of this band, some of that band. And they'll be mostly right. But where it feels really special are those nights where you connect with someone who doesn't have that context, who's reacting not to their own memories directly or to a recognition of their own record collection. They're reacting purely to the content of your music in that moment. Whenever anyone comes up to us after a set and says, I don't know what you just did, but it was great, that gives me this enormous charge. Like, those moments have really pulled me from the doldrums in the past. If you can connect outside of your genre niche, if you can connect beyond just the crate diggers, that's a sign you're communicating effectively, which is what all art is supposed to do. What do you hope people take away from your music? I hope people take away from our music some enjoyment and edification and a sense that they're not alone. I hope people find in our music something they can commiserate with, but ultimately leaves them feeling like the future can be better. And hopefully someone gets the jokes too. I try to make sure there are some jokes in there.